Hey there! Welcome to Karma Boomerang. I'm so glad you're here. This is where we share the most satisfying stories of people getting exactly what they deserve. You know those moments when someone thinks they're so clever, but karma has other plans? Yeah, we love those stories. If you enjoy watching justice served with a side of sweet satisfaction, you're going to love it here. Hit subscribe and let's dive into today's incredible story.
You're nothing but a burden, old man. Do us all a favor and stay out of the way. Those were the exact words my son-in-law, Brad, spat at me during last year's Thanksgiving dinner. He said it casually, as if humiliating me in front of my own daughter and grandchildren was just another way to pass the gravy. But I smiled and said nothing. I let him believe that I was the humble, aging father-in-law he could mock without consequence. What Brad didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for a long time. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Now, let me tell you how I went from being the invisible old man at the dinner table to Brad's boss. Brad was everything you would expect from a man born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was handsome, confident, always dressed in tailored suits and driving the latest luxury car. He married my daughter, Emily, 5 years ago. She adored him back then, blind to the arrogance that oozed from his every pore. I wanted to like him. I wanted to believe that this man who had never worked a hard day in his life would take care of my little girl. But I saw through him from the very beginning. Brad loved appearances. He loved to remind everyone how successful he was, how connected he was, how much money he had. He owned a mid-sized construction company inherited from his father and treated it like a throne. He expected Emily to play the role of perfect trophy wife while he paraded their life around to impress his friends. And me? I was the poor, retired electrician from the wrong side of town. At least, that's what he believed. I had built my entire life with calloused hands and long nights, saving every dollar I could. My late wife and I had raised Emily with values Brad would never understand. Work hard, stay humble, help others. I thought maybe, with time, Brad would see the world the way we did. But he only grew more entitled. Every holiday, every family gathering, he found ways to belittle me. "What could you possibly understand about business, Frank?" he would say, smirking as the room went silent. "You fixed wires for a living. I manage millions." Emily would squeeze my hand under the table, silently asking me to let it go. For her sake, I did. I never responded. Never gave him the satisfaction of knowing how much it stung. But inside, I kept score. Then came the dinner that changed everything. Brad's company was struggling. I knew it from the hushed phone calls in the other room and the sleepless nights he thought nobody noticed. He had overextended himself, taking on too many high-risk projects, betting on a real estate boom that never came. Banks were breathing down his neck, suppliers demanding payment. He was in over his head, and for the first time in his life, Brad was drowning. That night, as he once again ridiculed me for living off Social Security checks, I smiled. He had no idea that the man he was mocking was sitting on a small fortune. Decades of saving, investing carefully, living below my means. I'd never flaunted it because I never needed to. But now, I realized that money could serve a new purpose, a very satisfying one. Over the next few weeks, I started making calls, quiet calls to people I trusted, people Brad didn't even know I had connections with. I learned exactly how deep his company's problems were. He was desperate for investors, for anyone willing to inject cash to keep the business afloat. The vultures were circling, waiting for him to fail so they could buy the company for scraps. That's when I made my move. I contacted his largest creditor through a lawyer and began negotiations to buy their stake. It wasn't easy. I had to be patient, discreet, One wrong word and Brad would find out. But slowly, piece by piece, I started gaining control. I bought shares from minor investors, ones who were tired of Brad's mismanagement. I offered fair prices, just enough to entice them to sell without raising suspicion. Each deal brought me closer to majority ownership. Meanwhile, Brad had no clue. He was still walking around like a king, lecturing me about modern business strategies on Sunday dinners, laughing about how people like me could never understand his world. If only he knew. One night, Emily called me in tears. Brad had snapped at her again, blaming her for his stress. He says he's under pressure, Dad, but I'm scared. He's changing. My heart broke hearing my daughter's voice shake like that, but I knew what I had to do. I told her to stay strong, that things would work out. What I didn't tell her was that I was about to pull the rug out from under her husband's feet. By the time Christmas rolled around, I owned 42% of Brad's company. He didn't know it yet, but the balance of power was about to shift. Forever.
By January, Brad's company was barely staying afloat. I could see it in his eyes every time we crossed paths at family gatherings. He tried to hide it behind his usual arrogance, but the strain was showing. The once perfectly groomed businessman now had shadows under his eyes and a short temper that lashed out at everyone around him, especially Emily. One Sunday afternoon during a family lunch, he snapped at me in front of everyone. "Frank, why don't you just stick to fixing your leaky faucets and stop giving advice about things you'll never understand? You've never managed anything bigger than a toolbox." He laughed at his own joke, but nobody else did. Emily lowered her head, ashamed. I felt a familiar burn in my chest, but I stayed quiet. He would know soon enough. What he didn't realize was that at that very moment I was finalizing an agreement that would change everything. That week, I bought another 15% of his company from a group of silent investors who were tired of his mistakes. It took nearly all of my savings, but I didn't hesitate. I wasn't just rescuing a failing business, I was reclaiming my dignity. With those shares, my ownership rose to 57%, majority control. Brad was about to lose the throne he thought was untouchable. The next step was to set the stage for the reveal. I needed to make sure it happened in a way he couldn't spin or talk his way out of. So I called an emergency board meeting, using my newly acquired authority. I signed the notice with my lawyer's help, ensuring it was perfectly legal. Brad received the email 3 days later. Emily told me he stormed through the house, furious and confused. "Who the hell called this meeting? This is my company. My board answers to me." But he went anyway. He had no choice. That morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit, the same one I'd worn to walk Emily down the aisle. My hands shook slightly as I adjusted the tie in the mirror, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. I was about to show Brad and everyone else who I really was. When I arrived at the boardroom, Brad was already there, pacing like a cornered animal. He glared at me the moment I walked in. "What are you doing here, Frank? This is a business meeting, not a retirement home social club." I didn't answer. I just took my seat at the head of the table, the chairman's seat. He froze, clearly stunned. "That's my seat," he snapped. "Not anymore," I said calmly, sliding a stack of legal documents across the table. "As of last week, I own 57% of this company. That makes me the majority shareholder, which makes me your boss." The color drained from his face. He grabbed the papers with trembling hands, flipping through them in disbelief. This is a joke," he stammered. "You can't just buy my company out from under me." "I didn't buy your company, Brad," I said, my voice firm. "I bought the shares from the people you failed to lead, the people who were tired of your reckless spending and poor decisions. This company needed stability, and now it has it." He looked around the table at the other board members, desperate for support. But none of them met his gaze. They knew the truth. They'd been waiting for someone to step in and save the company. You "You planned this," he whispered. "All those times you sat there in silence while you mocked me?" I finished for him. "Yes, Brad, I planned this for months, and now things are going to change." He slammed his fists on the table. "You think you can run this company? You don't know anything about modern business." "I know enough to know what respect looks like, and I know enough to surround myself with people who actually know what they're doing, which is why your future here depends on whether you can humble yourself and work with me. If not, I'll find someone else who can." He stared at me, hatred and fear warring in his eyes. For the first time since I'd met him, Brad had nothing to say. The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I let the weight of the moment sink in before I spoke again. "I have a choice, Brad," I said quietly. "You can stay on as CEO under my supervision and work to repair the damage you've done, or you can resign and walk away with what little dignity you have left. But make no mistake, the days of you running this company unchecked are over." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He looked smaller somehow, like the inflated ego had finally deflated. He dropped into his chair and buried his face in his hands. The meeting continued without him saying much. The other board members voted unanimously to confirm me as chairman, and I laid out a plan to restructure the company's finances and operations. It was a long road ahead, but I knew we could save it. And as I walked out of that boardroom, past Brad's slumped figure, I couldn't help but feel a sense of poetic justice. For years, he'd treated me as if I were nothing. Now he would have to answer to me every day. But this was only the beginning. Brad wasn't the type to surrender easily, and I knew he'd try to find a way to claw back control. The difference was, I was ready for him. When I left the boardroom that day, I felt a sense of victory I hadn't experienced in years. But I also knew Brad wouldn't take this lying down. He was the type of man who'd rather burn everything to the ground than admit he'd lost. That night, Emily called me, her voice shaky. "Dad, what happened at the meeting? Brad came home furious. He wouldn't talk to me, but he was throwing things in his office." I could hear the fear in her voice, and it broke my heart. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I said gently. "I'll handle Brad. You just focus on taking care of yourself and the kids." But inside, I was already bracing for the storm. Over the next few days, Brad tried everything to regain control. He called his contacts in the banking world, hoping someone would buy out my shares, but I had locked everything down legally. He even tried to intimidate the smaller shareholders in deciding with him, but they'd seen what I'd done to stabilize the company and wanted nothing to do with his chaos. Each failure only made him angrier. One evening, he showed up at my house unannounced. He didn't even knock, just barged in like he owned the place. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Frank?" he shouted, slamming the door behind him. "You think you can humiliate me like that and get away with it?" I stayed seated at the kitchen table, calm, letting him rant. "Brad," I said evenly, "you did that all by yourself. You were running the company into the ground. I stepped in to save it." "Save it?" he exploded. "You're destroying me. Do you have any idea what this looks like? My employees, my friends, they all think I'm some kind of failure now." I stood up slowly, meeting his glare. "Maybe you should start worrying less about how things look and more about how you treat the people around you." He clenched his fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me, but then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I sat back down, exhaling slowly. Brad was unraveling, and that made him dangerous. A few days later, I saw just how far he was willing to go. I arrived at the office one morning to find chaos. Employees were whispering in the hallways, looking at me with uneasy expressions. My assistant pulled me aside. "Brad's been spreading rumors," she said quietly. "He's telling people you're senile, that you're too old to run the company. He even hinted you might be mismanaging funds." My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you for telling me. We'll deal with it." Brad thought he could smear my reputation and scare me into stepping down. He was wrong. I called an all-hands meeting that afternoon. When everyone had gathered in the conference room, I stood at the front and looked each of them in the eye. "You've probably heard some things about me. I want you to hear the truth from my own mouth. I may not be young. I may not wear the fanciest suits or drive the newest cars, but I built my life by working hard and keeping my word. And I will never ask any of you to do something I wouldn't do myself. This company is going to succeed because we're going to do things the right way, from the ground up." The room was silent for a moment. Then a few people started clapping. The applause spread until nearly everyone was on their feet. I saw Brad standing in the back, his jaw clenched, his face red with rage. He couldn't believe the employees were siding with me. After the meeting, he cornered me in the hallway. "You're turning them against me," he hissed. "No, Brad," I said calmly. "You did that all by yourself. People don't follow someone who belittles and bullies them. They follow someone they can trust." He glared at me, but he didn't have a comeback. That night, Emily called again. She was crying this time. "Dad, I don't know what to do. Brad's been drinking, slamming doors. He keeps saying you're ruining his life." I felt a deep ache in my chest, but I knew I had to stay strong. "Emily, listen to me. You and the kids need to be safe. If Brad ever threatens you, you call me immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "But Dad, I'm scared of what he might do next." I was too. Brad was cornered, and a cornered man can be unpredictable. I tightened security at the office, changed the locks at my house, and made sure Emily knew she could stay with me any time. I'd fought too hard to let Brad tear everything apart now. But even as I tried to protect the people I loved, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only beginning. Brad wasn't finished. He was planning something. I could see it in his eyes the next time we crossed paths at the office. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. Whatever he was up to, I knew I had to be ready for it. Brad didn't waste time escalating. After the disastrous boarding meeting and the failed smear campaign, he became more desperate, more dangerous. I could see it in the way he lurked in the shadows of the office, whispering with people, making calls he thought nobody was noticing. Then one night Emily called me, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Dad, Brad's talking about pulling money out of the company, all of it, before you can stop him. He's saying he'll leave you with nothing but rubble." My stomach dropped. If he drained the accounts, not only would the company collapse, but hundreds of employees would lose their jobs. It would ruin us all. I knew then I couldn't just wait for him to implode. I had to act. The next morning, I met with our legal team. They'd seen this kind of behavior before and already had contingency plans. Within hours, we froze the company's accounts, requiring dual authorization for any large transfers. When Brad found out, he lost it. He stormed into my office, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. "You had no right to do that," he screamed, his face red. "This is my company." "It's not your company anymore," I said evenly, "and as long as I'm in charge, I won't let you destroy it out of spite." He leaned across my desk, his hand shaking. "You're going to regret this, old man," he snarled. "You think you can humiliate me and get away with it? You have no idea what I'm capable of." I met his glare without flinching. "You're right, Brad," I said quietly. "I have no idea how low you're willing to sink, but I do know this: you're out of chances." He stormed out without another word, but I could feel the threat lingering in the air long after he was gone. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Emily and the kids, about how Brad might lash out at them in his anger. I decided to call Emily the next morning. "Sweetheart, I think you and the kids should come stay with me for a while," I said, "just until things calm down." She hesitated. "Dad, I don't want to make things worse." "Emily," I said firmly, "I'd rather have you mad at me than put you and the kids at risk. Pack a bag." She agreed, and by that afternoon, she was at my house, the kids trailing behind her with confused expressions. "Where's Daddy?" my grandson asked. Emily knelt down and hugged him tight. "Daddy just needs a little time to think, honey," she said, her voice trembling. Watching them made my blood boil. Brad had taken a beautiful family and filled it with fear. I promised myself I'd never let him hurt them again. The next day, Brad showed up at my house uninvited. He pounded on the door, yelling for Emily. I opened it just enough to step outside, blocking his view of the kids. "You need to leave, Brad," I said, my voice low and controlled. "You're not welcome here right now." "You think you can keep my wife and kids from me?" he shouted, spittle flying. "You're poisoning Emily against me." "No, Brad," I said, "you did that all on your own. If you want to see them, you're going to have to calm down and start acting like the husband and father they deserve." He glared at me with pure hatred, but I didn't move. Finally, he turned and stalked back to his car, tires squealing as he sped away. I knew this wasn't over. Brad was cornered, humiliated, and furious. He'd try to strike back, and I had to be ready. That night, I got a call from one of our suppliers. "Frank, I thought you should know, Brad reached out to me. He's trying to start a new company using your client list. He offered me a big contract if I switched." My grip on the phone tightened. Brad was trying to steal our business out from under us. I thanked the supplier for the information and hung up, my mind racing. If Brad built a competing company and poached enough clients, it could still destroy everything I'd worked to save. But I wasn't going to let that happen. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with the board and our top managers. "Brad is trying to undermine us from the outside," I said. "We need to protect our clients, our employees, and our reputation." Together, we put together a strategy. Personalized outreach to every client, reinforcing our commitment to their projects, and a public announcement about the company's new direction under my leadership. We offered loyalty incentives and assured them that Brad's reckless ways were behind us. It was exhausting work, but slowly we began to turn the tide. Clients who had wavered came back. Employees who had been afraid to choose sides rallied behind me. Brad's shadow started to shrink. But I knew him too well to think he'd give up so easily. He was out there, plotting his next move, and I had a sinking feeling it was going to be his most dangerous one yet.
Brad's next move was as reckless as it was predictable. 2 weeks after Emily and the kids came to stay with me, I got a call from my lawyer. "Frank," he said, "Brad just filed a lawsuit against you. He's claiming you manipulated your way into control of the company and forced him out." I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. It was exactly what I had expected. Brad wasn't interested in winning. He wanted to drag my name through the mud, to make me spend money and time defending myself. But what he didn't know was that I had prepared for this too. I handed everything over to the legal team. Emails, contracts, witness statements, financial records. Within days, we filed a counterclaim, detailing Brad's mismanagement, his attempts to drain the company accounts, and his efforts to poach clients.
The evidence was overwhelming. When Brad saw the stack of documentation we had compiled, his bravado crumbled. The lawsuit was dismissed before it even went to trial, and he was left on the hook for the company's legal fees. That was the final blow. One evening, I found him waiting outside my office building. He looked like a shadow of the man who had once strutted through life without a care. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and the arrogance was gone from his eyes. "Frank," he said quietly, I need a job." For a moment, I just looked at him. This was the same man who had mocked me for years, who had belittled me in front of my family, who had tried to destroy me when I refused to be his punching bag. And now he was standing in front of me, hat in hand, asking for a lifeline. "Why should I help you, Brad?" I asked. "You've done nothing but tear people down. You've treated Emily and the kids like props, and you tried to ruin this company because your pride couldn't handle the truth." He swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "I know. I was wrong. I let my ego get in the way. I lost everything, Frank. I don't have anywhere else to go." I studied him for a long moment, weighing my words carefully. "If I give you a job, Brad, it won't be the job you're used to. You'll be starting at the bottom. No fancy title, no corner office. You'll earn every cent the way the rest of us do." He nodded quickly, desperation clear on his face. "I'll take it. I'll do whatever you ask." "Good," I said, "because this is your last chance. You mess up and you're out. Do you understand?" "Yes," he whispered. And just like that, the roles were reversed. The man who had once treated me like I was beneath him was now working under my supervision, taking orders from the old man he used to mock. At first, he struggled. He wasn't used to real work, the kind that required humility and discipline. But I didn't let up. Every day, I reminded him what respect and responsibility looked like. Slowly, grudgingly, he began to change. Emily noticed it too. One evening, she came to me after picking him up from work. "He's different, Dad," she said softly. "The kids say he's calmer now. He's actually listening to them." I nodded. Maybe he's finally learning what really matters. We both knew it would take time to repair the damage he had done, but at least there was hope. As for the company, it was thriving. With the dead weight of Brad's ego gone, the team pulled together like never before. We won new contracts, strengthened relationships with our clients, and built a culture of trust and integrity. Employees who had once feared for their jobs now walked the halls with confidence. One afternoon, as I walked through the office, I passed Brad at his new desk. He looked up and met my gaze. For the first time in years, there was no resentment in his eyes, only quiet understanding. He gave me a small nod. I nodded back. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. That night, after Emily and the kids had gone home, I sat on my porch with a glass of whiskey and thought about everything that had happened. I thought about the years I had spent biting my tongue, letting Brad's words roll off me for the sake of my daughter. I thought about the moment I decided I'd had enough, and the long, careful steps I had taken to reclaim my dignity. And I thought about the future, the company we were building, the family we were trying to heal, and the peace I finally felt, knowing I had stood up for myself. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.